Good afternoon, everyone. I have the sincere pleasure to introduce our two next speakers, Jill D'Alessandro and Megan Osborne. I'm magnetic. Jill is the director and curator of the Avenir Institute of Textile Arts and Fashion at the Denver Art Museum. She currently curated the exhibit Weaving a Foundation. Prior to joining the Denver Art Museum in January 2023, Jill served as curator in charge of costume and textile arts for the Fine Arts Museum in San Francisco for 21 years, where she worked with the Institute's fiber collections and its fashion holdings. Jill is a textile and costume curator with experience in textile history and women's costume, a seasoned exhibition curator, Fulbright scholar, published author, education symposium organizer, nationally acclaimed fiber artist, supervisor, mentor, and collaborator. The Denver Art Museum is an educational nonprofit that sparks creative thinking and transformative experiences with art. Megan Osborne, who I have the pleasure of working with on the Avenir collection at the Colorado State University Department of Design and Merchandising. Megan is the assistant curator and collections manager at the Avenir. The Avenir Museum houses the university's teaching collection of textiles, clothing, and fashion. The museum also serves as public museum of historically and culturally significant items of dress, textiles, and interior artifacts representing regional, national, and international cultures. Megan has curated many exhibitions and is responsible for the daily management and care of the museum's artifacts. She also directs an active volunteer program and facilitates research with undergraduate, graduates, and visiting scholars. So how these next hour will proceed is that Megan and Jill will speak for about 20 minutes each on the local institutional perspective of Colorado's contribution to the textile arts, and then we'll have about 20 minutes of Q&A time. I believe, Jill, are you beginning? Oh, Megan's beginning, okay.
Great, thank you, Marilyn. Thank you for inviting me to join you today. I would like to start as our practice at Colorado State University by sharing our university's land acknowledgement with you. Sorry. I would like to start by sharing the university's land acknowledgement. That is our practice at Colorado State University. Next slide, please. Colorado State University acknowledges with respect that the land we are on today is the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute nations and peoples. This was also a site of trade, gathering, and healing for numerous other native tribes. We recognize the indigenous peoples as the original stewards of this land and all of the relatives within it. As these words of acknowledgement are spoken and heard, the ties nations have to their traditional homelands are renewed and reaffirmed. CSU is founded as a land-grant institution. We accept that our mission must encompass access to education and inclusion, and significantly, that our founding came at a dire cost to Native nations and peoples, whose land this university was built upon. The acknowledgement is the education and inclusion we must practice in recognizing our institutional history, responsibility, and commitment. Thank you. I thought I would spend my time today introducing you to the Avenir Museum of Design and Merchandising at Colorado State University and sharing how the collection is making an impact on the community in northern Colorado and helping to shape the next generation of textile clothing designers, makers, and industry professionals. Understanding the unique needs of a university museum and collection requires a passion for using objects to foster a shared appreciation of the people who have already created things with students who will define the future of design. What began as a small study collection has grown into a museum facility that is designed to engage all people interested in learning about and understanding the world through clothing and textile history. Through exhibitions, courses, and public programs, the Avenir Museum fosters the telling of global stories of people and their textiles, dress, and interior furnishings, how they are made and used, and what they mean to us all. My next slide is a short video put together by our communications team, and you will hear from 3 of our amazing students.
Avenir means future. We use objects from the past to tell stories about our present and to design for tomorrow. The Avenir Museum of Design and Merchandising at Colorado State University is home to a wide range of dress and textile objects from around the world. Our collections of historical and contemporary apparel, accessories, flat textiles, and home furnishings spark research questions and creative inspiration across our community. Visit the Avenir Museum and spark your curiosity.
It's more of a community, I would say, a community of people who want to appreciate the archives of fashion.
We have 3 whole galleries that can display 3 different exhibits at once. And I think that's pretty spectacular for a state school fashion museum.
I think the Avenir Museum is a great resource for design students because of all the collections of chairs and textiles that they have.
I am Shaheen Gamari, and I am a senior in the apparel and merchandising major with a concentration in apparel design and production. As a student, this place is a great space. There's so much educational material, so many archives dating back to 1800s. You have racks and racks of clothes, which I thought was just like basic clothing, but you have like esteemed designers like Valentino, like you have Pucci, you have Thierry Mugler, all these amazing inspirations that people can really use.
My name is Rebecca Evans. I am a second-year graduate student in the apparel design and merchandising program. The focus of my study is mostly in historic fashions, which is why the Avenir is so important to me and what I'm doing in my research.
I'm Bella Otero, and I'm in the Interior Architecture and Design program. I went to the Fashion Fundamentals camp in middle school. We had a little history section where we would go and look at the clothes and garments and textiles. The next time I came to the Avenir Museum was when I was officially in college last year, and I was here for my History of Interior Design class when we were doing a chair project. We were researching them and looking at the details and measurements so that we could do a scale model of them.
It's great to see it up and close and in person, seeing the trims that they used, seeing the finishes, seeing the fabrics. It gives me something more to think about other than pictures. It's more of an experience, rather.
Many of our donors are part of our local community, and so there's so much of Fort Collins and northern Colorado that is woven into our collections. There's so much history here just from the area that it's a really kind of special teaching collection.
You don't know what you're getting into until you go back there. You think like, oh, it's just like a cabinet or two of like clothes. Like, no. It's rows and rows and rows of cabinets, and under those you have these drawers of these beautiful flat textiles and hats and gloves from artists like Schiaparelli, and these beautiful, awesome garments and objects that we can take so much inspiration from.
The Avenir is a rather indispensable resource for me and the work that I'm doing because they have these objects and I can take them out, I can look at them, I can touch them with gloved fingers. I can really get in and look at the micro stitches in each garment, which ends up informing my research.
I think whether you're local, international, from any parts of the world, I think the Avenir is a great hub for that educational material, whether it's local designers that we have showcased, whether it's our mending workshops that really hone in on the idea of community and mending any items that you have, and just the plethora of education that we offer here is really, truly amazing.
Material culture is really important no matter what major job you are. It's just really interesting to learn about our past, and history is a very important part of who we are.
It's been a really great way for me to learn care and conservation through object-based research.
It's such a source of inspiration for design and such a stepping stone for not only designers, but for everybody. So much more than a museum. It's a community.
I love showing that video. I think our students are our best ambassadors, and those three are just stars. Shaheen, who was just speaking, actually just graduated, and we're showing some of his work in our gallery right now, if you make your way up there. All right, I'll tell you a little bit about the history, how we came to be to serve those three amazing students and many more. In 1948, Dagmar Gustafson, who's pictured here, began a position as an associate professor of textiles and clothing in what was then called the Division of Home Economics at Colorado A&M. For the next 20 years, she taught courses in clothing and textiles, became head of the department, and expanded the curriculum to include industry internships for students. Among her many achievements, and one of her most visible and lasting legacies, was the establishment of the historic clothing and textile collection. The collection would go on to become the Avenir Museum of Design and Merchandising. In 1965, the first items were formally donated to the university to form the study collection and design resource for students and faculty. Gustafson envisioned a museum that organized and preserved a collection of textiles and clothing from around the world. She wanted dedicated spaces for it to be available for students to examine and research, and a gallery for hosting exhibitions that would welcome visitors to campus. After Gustafson retired in 1968, the collection she started continued to develop under the care of other faculty and staff. Items were stored in small rooms, closets and drawers spread all over Guggenheim Hall until the opening of the Gifford Building in 1976. A space on the top floor of that building was designed to store the growing collection, and 30 years later, it found a new home. The university purchased the old Fort Collins High School building in 1997. A major renovation and remodel of that space opened in 2009 as the University Center for the Arts, or the UCA. The facility brought together the visual and performing arts into one building filled with classrooms, performance venues, and galleries. A lead gift from the Avenir Foundation and a grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services secured a space for the historic clothing and textile collection as part of this multidisciplinary facility. The transformation of a portion of an annex building created a collection storage space. The collection was transported on trucks across campus and unpacked in its new home. That's where I came in. I unpacked everything. This expansion of the storage space included a classroom, reading room, and spaces for processing and studying the collection. The Avenir Gallery provided an exhibition space that was more accessible to visitors, honoring Dagmar's original vision. Only 4 short years later, 2014, I had to pack up everything again for another temporary move across campus. An additional lead gift from the Avenir Foundation expanded the annex building into what is the Avenir Museum of Design and Merchandising today, a facility with 3 exhibition galleries, a large reading room, and a multi-purpose teaching facility for classes and public events. The existing portion of the annex building was renovated to add more storage, improve the environmental controls, and create additional spaces to study and care for the collection. In 2015, once the renovation and expansion of the annex building was complete, with students and community volunteers, one who's here today, we began unpacking the collection while also planning and installing the first exhibitions in the new galleries. The Avenir Museum opened to the public on January 30th, 2016, featuring exhibitions of traditional and contemporary Guatemalan fiber arts, fashionable apparel of the designer Mr. Blackwell, and dozens of miniature quilts made by Lucille Hawks, a department alum and longtime supporter of the collection. The images on the screen here today on the far side show up both top and bottom the images of our first dedicated space in the Gifford Building that the collection moved to in 1976. The 2 central images, top and bottom, are the first move in 2009 into the first iteration of the annex building. You can see it behind the 3 on the top holding the mannequins. And then the 2 on the far side was the unpack and rehousing of about 25,000 objects. You can see me standing in a sea of drawers that were palletized and moved multiple times, and I have threatened if they ask me to move the collection again, I will turn in my resignation. So, next slide, please. The Avenir collection is comprised of over 25,000 artifacts of historically and culturally significant objects related primarily to 19th and 20th century Euro-American material culture, as well as non-Western or global material culture, with depth in both textiles and garments from India, China, Japan, Central Asia, and Central and South America. Collections are actively used for teaching by faculty, research for students, and also community members, and interpretive exhibitions. Special collections include designer garments from the likes of Calvin Klein, James Galanos, Carolina Herrera, Claire McCardle, Bonnie Cashin, among many others. The Avenir Museum is home to the largest publicly held collection of work by the designer Mr. Blackwell, a mid-century American designer. The Ruth Paine-Hillman Lace Collection, consisting of over 1,500 pieces of historical lace and lace-making tools. And the global highlights of the collection include the Maxon collection of over 300 Japanese kimono, the Judy Arndt collection of Central Asian ikat and embroidered textiles, the Martha Egan collection of over 200 Central American, primarily Guatemalan woven objects, and a collection of pre-Columbian and modern textiles from Peru and Bolivia. I have, again, just a little short video here that gives you a fun view of some of the pieces that were on the first set of exhibitions. We have a great communications team. They're amazing. Next slide, please. All right, the teaching and research, our main reason for being. Students in our program are interested in promoting creative, sustainable solutions while utilizing critical and design thinking processes. We offer innovative majors in apparel and merchandising and interior architecture and design. Creating a resource for all students, whether studying in our department or another across campus, has always been the driving force for establishing and growing the historic collection or clothing and textile collection. Over the decades, thousands of students across multiple degree programs have studied in the collection. Most students interact with the collection during classes, while others have worked with curators and collections managers to help research, preserve, and exhibit objects. Next slide, please. Design and merchandising is an outgrowth of what was once home economics. Students who pursue degrees in our department participate in academic programs that offer a holistic learning experience that foster knowledge and skill development while embracing diverse cultural and global perspectives, innovative technologies, and experiential learning. Students have numerous opportunities to participate in community service learning projects, design and research competitions, study tours, internships, and student organizations like the Patchwork Initiative, the group that's pictured on the slide here today. This group is a student-led organization that focuses on practicing and promoting sustainable practices in the clothing and textile industries. And they have come to us multiple times, but on this occasion, pictured here, they had a request to study historic mending practices that were represented in our collection. And my colleague Doreen Beard here is taking the students through the details of a very heavily mended dress from 1887. Next slide. We extend our mission beyond the university students to community groups as well. Fashion Fundamentals is a 2-week summer program designed to enhance young people's interest and self-esteem in science, technology, engineering, and math by leveraging their interests through a passion for fashion. This is a program that's open to middle school-aged students. The program offers opportunities for participants to work with and learn from objects in the collection. So the image on the right here, myself and my colleague are taking them through the details of 2 mola, a sari there in a center, and then a Japanese kimono in the foreground. In addition to nurturing the next generation of textile researchers, the Avenir is committed to hosting textile artists from around the world. We firmly believe that exposure to objects and the artists who created them advance and expand the education and outreach mission of the museum and the university, and have a significant impact on the surrounding community. Pictured here are 2 representatives from Multicolores, a nonprofit based in Guatemala, and we have worked with them on a few occasions to exhibit their work. Next slide, please. We also offer access to the community. This is an image of a local questers group that helped the museum raise funds to purchase the collection that you're seeing there, and we are sharing with them the fruits of their labors in this intimate talk that we hosted for them. The collection is made available to numerous researchers from outside the university, whether researching a book about the Santa Fe textiles on the Santa Fe Trail or studying medieval textile imagery in our reading room. The collection serves many interests, which I really think speaks to the universal nature of textiles and clothing as something that unites us all, a common point for us all to come together around. Next slide, please. One of the primary ways the museum impacts the local, regional, and national textile community is through exhibitions. The research conducted by students and university faculty is disseminated through exhibitions that are open to all. Next slide. The Avenir Museum has 3 dedicated gallery spaces. This is an image of our primary large gallery, the Avenir Museum Gallery. It is a completely flexible space that changes 2 to 3 times annually. Right now, this is an image of our current show, Resist, Tie-Dye Practices from Around the World, where our curator was really exploring the evolution simultaneously and through cultural exchange of tie-dye practices across the world. Next slide, please. Our second exhibition space, the Richard Blackwell Gallery, is currently showing Inside Out, Structures and Secrets. That's the image on the top. Details of all of our past exhibitions are available on our website. I wanted to include the lower image here today. We have a wonderful volunteer corps that works with me at the museum, and a handful of them helped curate the exhibition here, pictured here, called Orange, a short history of orange in fashion, which is an absolute explosion of orange color in this gallery. Was absolutely amazing. And the curator is here today if you want to talk to her afterwards. It's not me. Next slide, please. Our last gallery is the Lucille Hawks Gallery. It's currently showing Walk the Kaleidoscope, student fashion from our recent graduate class, but the image here is of the show that just closed, a Fancy Flourish Mary Frances handbags. Next slide. Thank you for allowing me to share a little bit about the Avenir Museum and our mission with you today, and I look forward to any questions that you may have, and we are on all the socials, and our website is available, and we would love for you to come visit us if you have time while you're here, those of you who aren't local. Thanks.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you so much for inviting me to come speak. I've heard of WARP several years ago when one of your a WARP member was a vendor in an event that was hosted by my former institution in San Francisco. So it's a real honor. Unlike Megan, who knows her institution inside and out, how long have you been at? 16 years. I have 1 year under my belt at the Denver Art Museum. So in preparing for this, you're going to have a journey with me as I got to know the program and the history of the Denver Art Museum. So the Denver Art Museum was founded in 1893 as the Denver Artists Club. Today it is one of the largest art museums between Chicago and the West Coast, with a global art collections that represent cultures from around the world, as well as artists from Denver and the Rocky Mountain area. It is internationally known for its indigenous Arts of North America collection, and the museum also has one of the finest collections of Latin American art and art from the ancient Americas. Next slide. So this is, I just mounted, well, it feels like just, but it opened at the end of February, was my first exhibition at the Denver Art Museum. and I titled it Weaving a Foundation, Cornerstones of the Textile Arts Collection. I want to describe that a little bit because I got the title. My mother used to say, to build a strong foundation, put your cornerstones in place. And so it was a little bit of a nod to my mama, but also that as I arrived at the museum and I started to study the database, and we have about 8,000 textiles in the Textile Arts collection. A lot of the textiles are also still held in the Indigenous arts collections, and so you could almost double the number of textiles if you would add that. I started, when you go into our database, it's chronological from the beginning. And I'd click through and I'd be like, ooh, I like that piece. Oh, that's a nice piece. Oh, that's rare. And then I discovered that it came from 2 generations of one family. And that was really interesting. That had a really good eye. So the Denver Art Museum didn't become a collecting institution until 1925 or 27, depending on who you ask. And the textile department wasn't founded until 1955. Up into that period, it was really falling under the auspice of the Native American department, or the curator of Native American arts. And so I discovered that all these unique pieces that were being gifted to the museum were actually from his family. He was a very famous in the Native American art study. He's incredibly well known. His name is Frederick Douglass, or he went by Eric. He was hired in 1929, but his parents had already been, they had already been donors to the museum. And so I was really looking at these collections, their impact, and he was a very forward-thinking curator. So the exhibition has 60 objects in it, and 60% of it had never been put on view before. It's a great story, but they're a very Colorado-based story. His mother came out to the Denver area, actually settled in Evergreen with her mother in the late 1900s, and she became one of the first female doctors in the state of Colorado. She was, I think, number 5 in Colorado. This was a time when there was about 500 female doctors in the entire United States. She met and married her father, the father who ended up was one of her former patients. Those things don't happen anymore. A lot of things, but anyway, and they built this amazing campground. It's called, and is now a museum, the High Homestead, and that's where Eric Douglass grew up. And they were amazing collectors, and I would have had a photo of the house. But anyway, I started with the first section I called. Rooted in the Southwest, and we're looking at banded and striped blankets, because that really is at the heart of Southwestern weaving, and so that's where we begin. Next slide. So here's another gallery view. One of the interesting things that Eric Douglass did is, he was hired in 1929. By 1930, he hired a Zuni painter, Red Robin, into staff, and Red Robin actually helped document the pieces in the collection. He was also on the board of the Indian Art and Craft Board. He was on the inaugural board, and so he really believed in the preservation of traditional cultures, but also creating economic relief. And so that is something that was right at the heart of curatorial practices at the Denver Art Museum in the 1920s, when this was really not happening elsewhere in the country. I just wanted to read one quote from him. In 1934, he described the museum's collection as very probably the only one in existence which is designed primarily to display the artistic side of Indian life. And so instead of treating it like ethnographic art. Again, he set up this long-standing tradition of working with the indigenous cultures, using them as consultants, using them as scholars. And it's continued on at the Denver Art Museum, but in his anyway, in honor of him, I also carried on that with this exhibition. And in fact, I hired Linda Teller-Pete, as you all know, to be the consultant on this exhibition. I let Linda review digitally all the Navajo weavings, Dene Navajo weavings that the Douglases had gifted. Then I had her choose which one she wanted to see, choose which ones we wanted to put on view, and then also write the exhibition text. So next slide. So kind of a fun journey, and again, everybody knew, well, a lot of people knew that Douglases were major impact on the study of indigenous arts, but very few people knew that they were major donors, other than my two predecessors. All the former curators knew. I shouldn't say none of it, nobody knew. My former curators all knew. It's in the department records. But they also have this huge, long interest in textile arts, and it started on Frederick and his wife Frida's honeymoon journey. They took a boat around the world, starting in Europe and going through, well, starting in New York, Europe, and then through Japan, China. But they developed a strong interest in India and Indonesia, and that was a lifelong interest. I was able to determine that I found the captain's log, and the places where they visited were the same places that the textiles are from that are currently in the collection. His widow, Frida, gifted them after his passing. Okay, so next slide. And so that was my journey into discovering the early histories of the collections. But by 1955, we did have curators on board. Many, maybe, and some of you know Imelda de Graw, who was a long-standing curator at the Denver Art Museum. She was the #2 curator in the textile department. Her successor was Alice Zaribich, who had been at the museum for 18 years. I'm just going to show you a little bit of the kind of breadth and depth of the exhibition program and this idea of what it means to be a textile department within a Gold Blue Art collections. So this is an exhibition that Alice did in, I think it was you can read it better than me, 2012, and it was called Threads of Heaven, and it was based on one of the most important collection in the department's collection, which was on Chinese Qing Dynasty textiles. They were gifted, over 600 Qing Dynasty textiles were gifted to the museum in 1977. They were from the collection of a Mrs. Grant, who spent 20 years in China, and actually she was informed, one of her collecting textiles, but her advisor on putting the collection together had been a former lady-in-waiting in the Empress Dowager, for the Empress Dowager. So next slide. This is a collection, one of the other areas of real depth and importance in the Denver Art Museum's collection is our American quilt collection. And there's over 300 American quilts. Alice did an extreme amount of research and displayed the collection several times. And you can see one of her beautiful presentations from 2015. And then 10 minutes, perfect. Next slide. So in 2016, like CSU, the Denver Art Museum received an initial funding from the Avenir Institute. This allowed us to open up rebuild the galleries. I think it was maybe 2013. Open up the galleries. Alice retired in 2015, and in that same year, Florence Mueller was hired as the new head of the textile and fashion department. She was an incredibly well-known and renowned French fashion scholar. And for a number of 7 years, she mounted beautiful fashion exhibitions at the Denver Art Museum. This was her first one. It was called Shockwave, and it looked at this moment in time in the late 1900s or 20th century, where the avant-garde Japanese designers took Paris by storm. They brought, and these are designers like Kansai Yamamoto, Kenzo Takada, Ise Miyake, Yoji Yamamoto, and Rei Kawakubo, and Junei Watanabe. And they brought a whole new sensibility to the fashion world. And so this was her first exhibition. Next slide. She also really leaned into her connections and knowledge of Parisian haute couture. This was an exhibition that focused around a donation from the daughter of Veronique Peck, and it was titled "From Paris to Hollywood: The Fashion and Influence of Veronique and Gregory Peck." And so here you're seeing it really primary is focused on high Parisian couture. And then next slide. Now this one I think has probably the best resonance to the agenda, I don't want to say agenda, for some reason it has a negative connotation, but it really doesn't need to. But this is the work of an exhibition dedicated to Carla Fernandez. How many of you know the work of Carla Fernandez? Okay, so I'm going to talk about it because I think you should know about her. So Carla Fernandez is a Mexican fashion designer. She founded her firm in 1992. Her father actually had been the curator at the Museum of Anthropology, and so she had early exposure to art, but also traditional textile traditions. And for many, many years, she worked for, oh my God, now I'm gonna forget. It's not on my piece of paper because I just know that because I've known Carla for so many years. She worked for the Mexican, it was run by the Mexican government. It's not Banamex. All right, it'll come to me after I finish talking. Anyway, so she worked for a cooperative run by the Mexican government. And then she opened up her own firm. And she does these really sort of fashion-forward designs, but she's working hand in hand with traditional artisans. So in 1992, she started Taller Flora, and is a mobile laboratory. It travels to indigenous communities throughout Mexico at the invitation of artisans cooperatives that create handmade textiles and crafts for a living. Over time, Fernandez has learned how these master artisans draw upon unwritten mathematical and emotional memories. She incorporates this generational knowledge into her contemporary design for a global market. Through the Taller Flora, Fernandez has worked with 164 artisans in 15 states and in 39 different locations. So she's able, and then through her sort of connections and high style, she's able to really sort of bring a lot of economic relief for them. This exhibition did actually travel to Paris after traveled to Mexico City and then to Paris after it closed at the Denver Art Museum. Next slide. And so I know that this is a global or a national organization, and so many of you maybe have not been to the Denver Art Museum, but if you are planning a visit, I just want to let you know that textiles are integrated throughout the galleries. And so you can go to any of the permanent galleries to see this. And so I think that as a curator, this is kind of a new and exciting thing for me at the Fine Arts Museums, that we only had one gallery, and if there's something wasn't on view, then you didn't get to see any textiles. But here you have a glance of our Indigenous Arts of North American galleries. And one of the other things, I like to say that it's the special sauce of the Denver Art Museum. And this was set by Eric Douglas, is that this idea that traditions are living and traditional cultures are living. And so throughout the galleries, what you'll see is contemporary art shown alongside traditional art forms. And so you see some historic Navajo Dene weavings, but then on the in that back right wall, that's a work by D.Y. Begay. Next slide. Here in the Art of the Ancient Americas, we have a beautiful pre-Hispanic collections, but you also see the work on that wall by Olga Diaz-Moral. Bogota from Colombia. She's an important figure in the development of post-war Latin American abstraction. One of I think the really unique things about Olga is that she does work with a team of 7 women who works for her. And I just wanted to read this quote because I think it's so beautiful. She wrote, "For the last 25 years, I have worked with 7 lives, 14 hands, 7 women who infuse each small element with Columbia's vitality." She continues, the communal process impregnates each bundle of strands with the spirit of each of these women's lives. Each element acquires a unique patina, as does the knob of the door to a frequented room. Next slide. So here's our African gallery, and you can see that we have a traditional Ghanaian print, and then next to it is the work by the really renowned artist El Anasui. Do you guys all know El Anasui? Yes. Okay, so El Anasui, beautiful piece. You can see it on view now. We did have, several years ago, an exhibition on him. But for those of you who don't know of his work, he works with material palette that is of discarded resources such as liquor bottle caps, printing plates, and graters. He's known for these large-scale hangings that are composed of thousands of components of crumpled pieces of metal from local and recycled stations that are bound together with copper wire. Through his work, El Anasui interrogates the legacy of colonialism, drawing on the connections between consumption, waste, and the environment. But at the core is his unique formal language that distinguishes his practice. Next slide. So here we have our Hawaiian galleries, and this is the new installation. The African oceanic, I just said Hawaiian, but it's oceanic, oceanic and contemporary galleries have just been reopened this year. And in this, for the reopening of the Oceanic Galleries, we commissioned a site-specific work from a New Zealand-born Samoan artist, Nikki Hastings McFall. And here she is, it's called a lay bomb, and she's addressing the nuclear testings that has happened in the South Pacific. The curator wrote, "For this inaugural exhibition, DAM aims to dispel romantic notions of the Pacific Islands as a tourist paradise through a nuanced exploration of the area's vibrant cultural landscape, challenging visitors to examine their perception of this vast and extremely diverse region." Okay, next slide. And here's the new contemporary art gallery, the new hang in the contemporary art galleries. And shown in the middle, you'll see the work by Maria Watt, who is a member of the Seneca Nation of Indians and who also has German Scott ancestry. And this work was actually commissioned for a major exhibition when the Avenir first funding from the Avenir came, and it was called Spun Adventures in Textile Programming, which was back in 2013. But she worked in collaboration with our educational staff and collected blankets from museums, patrons and members, and local communities. And her blanket story polls meditate on the importance of both literal and metaphorical of the blankets of our lives. And as she collects the blankets, she also collects the personal stories. And then last slide. This is the work, is going to be my next project, is on the work of British sculptor Laura Ellen Bacon. She will be at the museum She'll be at the museum for 2 weeks installing. She's a sculptor. She works with willow. She's self-taught, so she doesn't consider it to be basketry, even though it's twining. And I was like, don't say that. But anyway, it is a twining technique, and she'll be working with 7 assistants at the museum, creating a large-scale installation that's going to grow and push and move up one of the big walls when you enter the museum. So I look forward to someday having a really formulaic presentation. No, not really formulaic, but to have the numbers of objects in each area written down. But I'm really excited. I just want to say that we were asked to talk about, what does Denver bring to the textile world, and I'm just really excited that we're both here and we're both well funded, and that we've got complementary programs. And so anyway, Thank you.
Thank you, Megan and Jill. So now we're going to turn mics over. You're going to take one, and then they're going to pass back and forth, depending on who the question goes to, right? Okay.
This is a question for Jill. It's, first of all, the wonderful presentation. Love both of the presentations. I'm from the Bay Area. Why did you leave us for Denver? And quite seriously, is there a richer textile collection in Denver than there is at the DeYoung, or, you know?
No, that's not why. You know, that's so funny. I mean, a lot of it was just kind of a personal, like, they asked at the right time. I had just opened, like, my Guopei exhibition was up and it was doing really well, but it really was because of the opportunities here in Denver with the Avenir funding. It's a well-funded department. It also, to be honest, I had been at the Fine Arts Museums for 21 years, and I just wanted to have a new adventure. That I might have just been like my whole life would have been done doing one thing, but also it was the commitment based upon the Avenir Foundation to textile arts, and because I had up until you know, Weaving the Foundation was my first textile exhibition I had been able to do since 2016. I had mounted a lot of really large-scale fashion exhibitions, and the directive from the Denver Art Museum and from the Avenir Foundation is to build a balanced program, and it's all I ever wanted, right? So that's why. But I miss the Bay Area. The other thing, too, is that actually the storage rooms at the Fine Arts Museums are overfilled, and it was I think it's an important time. I think it's a really important time to, it's a really important time for the textile field. I think a lot of textile museums were kind of being under threat with this sort of shifting the focus from textiles to fashion. There's a lot of museums, their storage rooms are full, whereas a lot of really important collectors are coming of age and are looking for a place to put their collections. And so to come to a place where they needed someone to usher in a new era and also build the collection was really exciting for me. Good luck here. Thank you.
I'm going to move over so I can sort of see you. Still can't quite. Anyway, I'm Carol from Delaware. I'm wondering if the museum still has that fabulous wall of examples of different textile techniques and fibers and dyes. I was there whenever the Star Wars exhibit was at the museum with my grandkids, probably 7 years ago, and there was this incredible wall that talked about natural dyes. It was an educational thing, kind of geared maybe for kids.
Right, so that space is still there. I think that wall's been kind of reduced. I should have said that. There is an education gallery adjacent to, and also our conservation lab is open to not open like you can't walk in the door, but you can spy in on the conservators while they work. And so the Thread Studio is still there. The wall, it's funny because as I was preparing for this talk, I started to look back through all the different installations. I think it's smaller than what you saw, but it's still there, yes.
I'm just wondering if you'll talk about the future of fashion and textiles in both of your.
That's a fun one for me because I see it. We're training it at Colorado State University. I think the students who are coming out of our program have a very, very deep-rooted commitment to sustainability and to seeing through some of those transformations. in what is, I think, as we all know and can recognize, the textile and fashion industries are incredibly wasteful, polluting, terrible on the environment. And our students are so passionate about looking for critical ways to disrupt and change the current industry norms. So I think a big continued push, at least coming from the students who are being trained in our program, is to find ways, like through the Patchwork Initiative, through other influences that are thrust upon them, and then to take those out into industry once they leave the university and make impacts in the industry that way, would be my view.
Yeah, I also agree. I think that these looks on ecological are new pathways. I also think that the role in the museum is really important, because one of the things, when I look into the sort of the global sustainable market, is what I'm seeing is a lot of emerging designers wanting to look towards the history, or look to their traditions. And so I sort of, for myself, I know there's this whole technological side and new materials and new technologies, but there's also this this other side of it, which is like, I personally believe that the answers are within the indigenous cultures, but they're also within the pre-industrial period. And so our historic collections and our global collections can be a resource for students. I also just think it's a really exciting time for the textile field. You're seeing more exhibitions, more galleries showing and displaying textile arts. I understand that the Venice Biennale right now is probably really dominated by textile arts. So I think it's a really exciting time. I do think it's like the 1960s and 70s. The one thing that we have to is that because I don't want it to become a fad. I don't want it to be like taken over by somebody who's really interested in, like, the contemporary art curators are all really interested in it. Will they be interested in 10 years? So I think it's really important for us to sort of, embrace them and educate them and make sure that, we don't have, it doesn't become a fad that then also loses its momentum at another time. I don't think that's going to happen, though.
Since you're both from museums, and it's always interesting to me as the demographic changes in your communities. And, we've experienced a large immigration from the Americas, as well as Eastern Europe and Africa, throughout the United States. And so I think that, and of course, textiles are important in all of those communities. And I wonder how in the future you hope to address that, bringing in that new community that is not the traditional community that the organization was built on, but how you might be, using your collection to maintain your traditional community from your area, and then also incorporate your new demographic as it grows and becomes more part of the texture of that community.
Up at CSU, we have the benefit of being part of a really large organization, and so we are able to partner with other areas around campus to help foster those community connections. So one program that comes to mind, we worked with a French language faculty to put together a program for Francophone people coming from Africa. And it was an incredibly well-attended program. There was music, there was dance, and there was discussion about textiles. Many people came in their traditional garments, which was beautiful to see. And I think they felt so welcomed, which was just lovely for us. So we're trying to move on that model and base a lot of more of our exhibitions in shared authority with different groups. So we are bringing in a Korean embroidery exhibition this summer, and then are currently partnering with some of the Korean language faculty on campus to get students who are of Korean descent to partner with us to just sort of make a richer experience for everyone involved, and to recognize the traditions that are coming from their place of origin. And we're just trying to direct a lot of our collecting efforts towards building up those parts of the collection that aren't well represented. We are quite lucky to, over the past 60 years, have built a very broadly global collection. That was a passion of Dagmar Gustafson. She didn't want just, ladies' suits from the 1950s from a Euro-American look. So she really, our founding philosophy was to go beyond, and we, I think, have done a really great job of maintaining that, and now really working hard to share that out to the broader community as the demographics are changing in northern Colorado.
Well, that's a good question. I think that's always been a challenge for a museum, and I think that we're doing some of the similar things. Again, I don't have the institutional knowledge that Megan has, but I think that one of the sort of wonderful things is that actually for the Carla Fernandez exhibition, the one thing I do know is that we sold more Spanish, more catalogs that were written in Spanish than in English. So I think that we are doing some things right. I think that there's certain areas, there's certain departments that are better situated for outreach than others as the demographics changes. For example, the Denver Art Museum does have one of the greatest Latin American, really strength in that, indigenous arts of North America. And so I think one of the things that we talk about at the museum is how do we strengthen how do our other departments become as strong as that department. I will say for myself that one of the things that's kind of wonderful, the sort of double-edged sword of living in a global economy is that you are able to sort of work, through the internet with people and get consultants. So for example, just in my first exhibition, I worked with Vandala Bandari, who is a leading scholar of Indian textiles from East India. And actually, I don't know do you guys know about the Gandwawa project? But she helped me work with a cooperative in India, and I acquired a piece for the exhibition in the spirit. I also was able to work with a professor at CU Boulder, and I was able to acquire a batik from an Indonesian batik from a living Javanese artist. And so I think that we've got our local communities, but we also have the opportunity. To bring people from contact. We've got a whole network. I mean, this whole organization is about networking, and so you can also work locally, but also think globally.
Okay, thank you. We have time for one last question. This one's going to come from online. This is for Megan. What type of careers have you seen your students go into after graduation?
A lot of our students go into the fashion design industry. Being situated in Colorado, a lot of them are interested in outdoor apparel. So we have had students in the very recent graduating class are starting positions with Nike, some with North Face, Spyder, which is based here in Boulder, not far from here. We also see students who go on to pursue additional degrees in the field and then go into teaching. There's a lot of interest in taking the knowledge that they're getting, and then they have this strong drive to share it, to disseminate it, to pass it on. So I see a lot of them actually continuing into master's and then on into PhD programs, which has maybe been a trend of the last 2 to 3 years. But primarily from our program, they're going into the outdoor apparel industry.
Okay, I'm sorry that we're out of time. If you had a question that's just burning on your mind, please come see Jill and Megan after we take our break. So Jill and Megan, thank you so much for being here with us today.